So, hacking, as you can see on this cover page, can go either way. It can be the destruction of an entire society, and we've kind of already started to see some potential aspects of that when you take a look at recent federal elections in the United States and other places in the world. Or it can be a force of good, where you go through and you take a look at what's going on in a system, and then you mitigate any problems that that system might have. And that's what I want you to focus on. I want you to understand systems so well that you can spot the vulnerabilities in them and mitigate any potential attacks to that system. Okay? Hackers could be good, pleasant, and extremely intelligent people who keep criminals on the run. And we're going to have a couple of other quotes when we take a look at this. But, yeah. Basically, I gotta get rid of that slide. Basically, what you're going to talk about here is ethics. Some people think they are difficult, if not impossible. Some people say it's a learned skill. Like if you take a look at some of the writings from Nietzsche or Ayn Rand, I can never say her name, Ayn Rand, they actually believe, and frankly, these people are not dystopian, but if dystopian has cousins, they would be these guys. They are very negative people. And they believe that ethics was actually a false construct used to keep the masses in line. It's that by saying you should be ethical and you should be, doing everything right and you should follow the laws and you should never cheat on your taxes, these are tricks that people in power use to keep us in line. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. As with most complex systems, there's probably some truth in that. There's certainly a lot of do as I say, not as I do when we take a look at some of our elected officials, and we only have to look at the last week to see examples of that here in Canada. However, there's also counter-arguments. If any of you have had a chance to read Dr. Yuli Nova's, no, that's not his name. It's called Sapiens. Dr. Harari, what the hell is his name? I don't have the book here, but does anybody know the book I'm talking about? Anyway, there's a book called Sapiens, written about the history of the human being and the evolution of society, he's a historian and he presents it in that context. And it's a really good book talking about the evolution of society and how society exists and succeeds because when you take a look at Dr. Harari's book, yeah, now it's registering it. He talks about how society basically evolved because everybody was working together. You cannot have evolution in a society when people are working against each other. It simply doesn't work that way. It's a great book, Sapiens. If you haven't had a chance, read it. I recommend it strongly. It will not help you in this course. It'll just make you a better, more critical thinker. It's a good read. All right? Conscious choice is really what ethics are. Sometimes you're told to do things and you can say that alleviates your ethics, and we'll see that in a little bit. But when it's left up to you and the decisions you make, that's when it becomes ethics over codes of conduct, if you will. And as you just saw with my PayPal example, I will teach you things that will tempt you, right? I will teach you how to crack passwords in this class. If you use that, because there's this coworker at work and you know they're talking trash, you know they're wrecking your career at that organization, and you got to capture what they're saying so that you can hold them against it. And you have the skills and you have the opportunity to take advantage of it should you do it. I will tell you that you shouldn't, but at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to have to make that call, because I will give you the tools necessary to achieve that goal. All right? Any questions? If you have any questions, don't be afraid to just start talking. Thank you. Thank you, Jared. Dr. Yuval Noah, Sapiens. In the chat log, Jared posted a book, and if you have a chance to read it, it's a really good read. He's released a couple of other books as well. Seriously, if I had read this book in high school, I don't know if I would have been a technical person. He actually made history look interesting in that book. So for those of you who dismiss history, I used to be like that until I read Sapiens. It's a great, great book. Let's move on. As I said, ethics is basically what you set as your own set of values, how you're going to operate. These are rules that you have imposed on yourself. I will never, insert statement here. I will never, strike a woman. I will never kick a dog. I will never steal money. I will never, insert those kinds of things. Those are codes of ethics. They can mirror codes of conduct, for example, the laws of the land. The laws of the land say you should not just strike people randomly. The fact that my ethics align with those codes of conduct or those laws of the land, that's good, but it doesn't alleviate you. You still need to come up with your own codes of ethics. Codes of conduct are often imposed by others, tell you what you should done, what must be done, or what must not be done. Think of them as rules. Codes of ethics, as I said, are self-imposed. It's who you are, what you stand for. They are guiding principles that help you make decisions in life, because we are all going to be tempted. It's very difficult to find good resources on hacking codes of ethics. I imagine it's going to start coming out soon, but a lot of the codes of ethics really come from the business world, which really do apply, and that's what we're going to get a lot of our content from. One of them is Kahler's gradations, where you have this range of behavior from the ultra-moral, where you're almost altruistic or self-sacrificial, right down to purely self-interested egoism. And you have that full range that you can operate on. And really there's that dividing line between quasi-moral and quasi-egotism or egoism. And really you have to pick where you choose to act and where you think you should act in the future. And anything above that dividing line is probably more of a ethical behavior. Anything below that is probably less ethical and getting into behavior that might have some consequences for you, negative consequences. Any questions on that? Of course, this wouldn't. Any questions? Of course, this wouldn't be a computer course without at least something that looks like a flow chart. And this is the kind of thing that you are probably going to see sometime in your career. You can have some kind of an ethical dilemma, and you have to make a decision on that to guide your behavior. You can have philosophical or ethical considerations that are going to feed into it, but you might also have some practical constraints as well. I never want any of my code to be used for stealing people's identity or personal information. You're working at MTS, Bell MTS, and they want you to write an algorithm that steals the people's location based on tower information or other, locational data, so that they can market better to you with an email campaign. Because you're MTS, they're going to send you once a week where you should really focus on your spending habits. And because you went to Polo Park twice in the last week, they're going to spam the hell out of you with Polo Park emails. Now, you have a job that says you should do this, but you have an ethical constraint because you don't want to be part of that. Those two things are going to govern your behavior. And I can't tell you what to do. You have to figure this out. It's good to have your ethics, but if you've got a family, you also need to pay the bills. You need to pay your mortgage. You need to put food on the table. So it's never going, at some point, it's not going to be an easy decision. And we are all faced this in our careers. The standard dilemma that a lot of us face as we go through our careers, especially as systems people. You see it less as a developer, but as a systems person, at some point, you're going to have to lock out a colleague who may actually be a friend from the infrastructure. And you can't tell them. All right? That's a hard pill to take that day. But, that's your job and you have to do it. Any questions? Sometimes it's okay to say no. Sometimes you can actually, and I found this Twitter example, if you want to take a look at it. you can actually try saying no, and it might not be the end of your career. You can say, no, I don't think we should do that. I think that's wrong, and I think these are the reasons why we shouldn't do that. And sometimes it's going to blow up in your face, and other times they may say, yeah, you know what, you're right, we probably shouldn't do this. They may be equivocating on that need, and you could just give them a push a little bit in the right direction. Of course, sometimes you're going to say, no, we shouldn't do that, and they're going to push you out the door. So govern yourselves accordingly. Your mileage may vary. Any questions? All right. And I am as guilty of this as anybody else, but the term hacker really shouldn't be a negative term. It is a term that has grown up over the years just because it's easier for organizations like news media to understand. Also, I think there was a little bit of manipulation, social engineering around the term as well, because frankly, in the early days of this technology, it was the crackers who were understanding the system so well that they could realize ways of exploiting it. The most famous one of the time was phone phreaks. They realized that these switching networks were controlled by tones, and if you could find a way of replicating those tones in the phone, you could manipulate the switching network so you could make long-distance calls for free, for example. There's a whole history around it. Research Captain Kirk and his crew on how they manipulated phone switching networks using a toy whistle, of all things. But organizations such as the FBI said, this is unacceptable behavior, and I think they helped make the term hacker into a pejorative, when really a hacker is somebody who understands a system so well that they can actually make it operate in a way that is unexpected. The better term that we're talking about is crackers. Crackers are the illegal implementation of hacking, where they try and destroy or manipulate systems for their own gains in a negative or damaging way. That term never really stuck. Hackers is the term that's become the term, so we better qualify it with ethical hacking, and that's what I'm going to try and teach you how to do. To that end, there are different types of hacking, as we saw ethical hacking, but there's another term, white hat hacking, where you try and have fun, do it for learning, do it for good, or, do it from a security point of view. The opposite is the black hat, the old cowboy model, where your intent is malicious or you're part of some kind of criminal enterprise. And of course, because it is information technology, there's always going to be that gray area between the two extremes. And really, morality is the difference between being a white hat and a black hat hacker. And a really good example I found for this, and this is a question I'm going to pose to you, is back in the day, the U.S. State Department basically said that, hey, if you're an American organization, we don't want you sending high levels of encryptions to countries or companies in countries that we want to spy on. Think Libya back in the day. So they would say, hey, if you're going to sell your product to Libya, you have to disable high levels of encryption so we can spy on their activities. Microsoft, being a good corporate citizen, asterisk, said sure. And what they did was they shipped a version of Windows Server that had the higher levels of encryption disabled. Clever hackers in those companies or government organizations looked at it, found where the higher level of encryption was disabled, and re-enabled that high level of encryption. My question for you is, are they black hat, are they white hat, or are they somewhere in between? Does anybody want to try tackling that? It would be great, but is it more black or is it more white? Okay, and why? They do deserve privacy, and that is a valid point, but there is no guaranteed federal privacy in the United States. And this is an American product. Also, and this is the part that really is frustrating, they signed an end-user agreement that said they will not manipulate the product. There's no way Microsoft in its end-user agreement expects people to manipulate things like this in their product. By the way, for the record, Jeremy, I agree with you. It is more white than black, but this is the kind of dilemma that we face. Anybody else want to chime in? Yep, I agree. And what is the wrong, if I may ask, Jeremy? Anybody else? There's one other thing that makes me think it's more right than wrong. And that is, does anybody else want to try before I give it? Yep. And that's a really good point, one I hadn't thought of, and there is a whole equality thing. That's actually a really good point, but along the lines of the country and country delineation. Anybody? I like that equality thing. That's a good point. For me, the hubris that allows the American government to tell how other countries and how these countries should subject themselves to vulnerabilities is incredible to me. That they can say, hey, you know what? We want to spy on these people, so don't make it hard for them to hide their behavior from us. That degree of hubris alone is just gobsmacking. And I find that truly incredible. And one more reason to use Linux. Any questions on that? Yeah. Gotta love Linux. All right. We've seen other places, like we talked about business ethics, but there are other examples of ethics out there as well. For example, MIT has their hacker ethic, and this predates a lot of the computer ethics that we're talking about here. This is a school that used to do pretty cool things like disassemble and reassemble VW bugs on a building, and they had their own code of ethics. Be safe, do not damage anything, be funny, at least to most of the people who experience. Do not damage anyone, either physically, mentally, financially, or emotionally. And that's kind of what I would like you to do. You can have fun with this stuff, but don't hurt anybody or any system. There's also the Rotary Group had their guiding principles that allowed them to help decide what to do. I mean, it's a business or government model, but it really is still relevant for what we're trying to cover in this class. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? That one's a little harder to apply to the technical world, what we're doing here, but it still can help you make the right decision. And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Now, it's not a copy-paste application of some of the problems you might have, but it's a good way of looking at the problem from a moral point of view. Any questions on either of those? All right, let's move on. There can be legal consequences to your behavior as well. Basically, the computer can be the tool, can be the target, or it can be the vector of attack. We often see these as servers or network infrastructure, but if we have a chance, and I don't know that we will because we never seem to have enough time to do this stuff in this course, but I'll try and show you some forensics that can be used to understand exactly what happened in an attack, so you can recreate the attack, so you understand what happened to your organization post-attack. Okay? On legal consequences, and I don't know why the slide isn't here, I'll have to find it, doesn't matter. There's also another consequence with hacking, in that the person who's actually hacking your site might not care about the law, all right? They could be in a jurisdiction that makes it very difficult to come after them. The example of North Korean or Russian hackers attacking your site. You're not going to get any legal redress against those hackers if they're from North Korea, or if they're the North Korean state, or if they're Russian hackers, because there's simply unlikely to be any legal consequence. We've seen that time and time again. They might simply not care wherever they are. They might be young, think they're invincible and invulnerable, and they can just attack, and they're too smart to get caught. Those are the fun ones because they always get caught. And they might just be outside of your jurisdiction, as I said, right? So there's a bunch of issues with legal and hacking as well. So rather than expecting to go after hackers, it's better to make sure that they can't compromise your system in the first place. Any questions on that? What we're trying to do is what's called maintain the CIA triangle in your organization. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And all three of these are trying to be maintained, and that's the goal of this course. It's not to teach you how to hack, it's to teach you the skills necessary to help maintain the CIA triangle, where people can't compromise your system, people can't gain uncontrolled access once they do have access to it, like you can't see somebody else's domain information because you don't have access to that information, and it's always up and available and it doesn't go down. And that's the CIA triangle right there. Okay? So any questions on that? Alrighty. So, not all breaches are necessarily a end of the world breach. There's degrees of data breaches as well. You could have an incident where somebody has tried to compromise your system or has compromised the system, but because you didn't just focus on the edge protection, you have other degrees of protection inside, and we're going to see this many times going forward. Layering your security helps mitigate against a complete data disclosure, because even if somebody gains access to your system because they found a very weak set of credentials giving, or old set of credentials giving access to one thing, but because you've got pretty good credential management everywhere else, they don't see anything else, fine, they got onto your network, you discovered it, you kicked them out, that's the end of the threat. Okay? The next level would be a breach, and that actually discloses potentially discloses data once that they've gained access to your infrastructure. And even if they can see the data, if they can't actually get access, like they can see the schema, they can see the database, they've got some credentials, but they can't actually extract the data because you have other systems in place saying, basically, I'll only allow queries to come from this IP address, and they're connecting through a completely different machine. So again, you can mitigate a lot of these threats by having layers to your security. If they've managed to get into your network, they've been able to see a database server, the last thing, of course, is exfiltrating data, where they're actually able to take data, not only just see the schema and see the database, but they're actually getting into the tables, getting into the records, and extracting that data and taking it outside of your organization. And that's where you have a data disclosure breach, and that, of course, is the most serious of all three. And that's why, that's the whole point right here, that's the entire point of this course, is so that you can understand this layered approach to security, and you can build in mitigations at every layer of your application stack. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Basically, let me answer the question with an example. You've got a database server set up, and you can see, and you've got a web server set up, and then the web server is talking to the database server. The database server is responding to requests to the web server, and you've seen the connection information for whatever reason. Okay, so you've seen all that, but you can't dial in and connect to the database because you're connecting from the wrong IP address. That's what the difference would be. If you can configure your database to only allow connections from one IP or localhost, if a more basic model, you only allow localhost connections based on that credential information, and somebody's gained access to your network and is now trying to hack that site, and they're trying to do some connection information so they can extract the data, they're not going to have any luck. Does that make sense, Marcus? Okay, all right, perfect. Any other questions? Spoiler alert, that's why we set up database IP ranges, we get into our database configuration and we can start limiting who can connect to our database. And then we're going to turn around and break that model when we do it so that you can see how bad it is. But that's in a couple of weeks, because right away I'm going to show you how to do a basic login system so you can use what we do for a proper login system in your full stack, because some of you are also part of full stack. So the web developers in full stack have asked me to teach you guys earlier on how to do a proper login script. So that's probably week 3. We'll get into doing proper login scripts at that point. Any other questions? Okay. As I said, I'm going to teach you how to do some pretty cool stuff in this class. please don't go on social media and say, hey, I just learned how to crack password, lulz, I am Uber, I am Lee. Please don't do that shit. The whole point of this program is to teach you how to be information security professionals, and that kind of behavior is not something that people who are hiring are going to be impressed by. A better turn of phrase would be, I just learned how to use tools for proper password audits so I can, hopefully build better websites in the future. Obviously, that's a little corny, but a statement like that speaks to professional application of the skills I'm teaching you rather than, less than professional. And you may say, yeah, well, is that really going to cost me the job? If that becomes a deciding factor, if you're one of 10 people trying to apply for the same job and you've got a social media presence that looks like you're some kind of script kiddie out there, yes, it will cost you the job. Okay? So I'm not saying don't talk about what we do in this course. I'm saying if you're going to talk about the skills you learn in this course, try and present them as a professional skill rather than some kind of, oh, look at how Uber I am, or I don't even know what the kids say anymore, but let's just go with that. Also, try not to involve yourself in social campaigns that seem like a good idea at the time. This is a bit dated, but back when Julian Assange first got arrested, there was a huge campaign to raise money for him. You all know who Julian Assange is, I hope. If not, you can Google it. There was a campaign to try and raise money for his defense because it was believed in the community that his behavior is acceptable. It is a form of journalism, and he's being prosecuted for bringing the truth to light. Whatever. I'm a former member of the Canadian Forces. I struggle with some of his behavior. But regardless, there was a campaign to raise money for his defense, and companies like MasterCard said, you know what, no, we're not going to contribute to this. I don't know if they had some political pressures that we were unaware of, but regardless, MasterCard said, no, we're not going to do this. And then the Vigilante Squad online decided that, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to take you offline. And they did a distributed denial of service attack against the MasterCard payment infrastructure, effectively taking it offline and preventing them from doing online transactions. And I think it was a little bit more, but it was a pretty serious LA, or I can't lie, low altitude, I can't remember it. There's a distributed denial of service set of scripts that you can use. That's it is, yeah. LOIC, that's what it is. Low altitude ion cannon. Yeah, that's what it is. Yes, just too many things to keep track of. Thank you for that. But basically, yeah, they use this distributed denial of service tool set, and regardless of what you think, getting involved in something like that is risky to your career. Even though you have the skills, and even though you can assume certain amounts of anonymity, keep in mind that data is simply data, and all that is required to figure out what's going on with that data is a question of time and resources. If you capture enough data, you can invalidate any security that is in place. Which brings me to another point that I'd like to make. If you want to keep something truly secret, never put it on the internet, full stop. The moment it is on the internet, you have to consider it compromised. And I'm not just talking about social engineering here. If you have a database that you don't want anybody to have access to, do what we call air gapping. Make sure that computer that has that information never touches the internet. Full stop again. All right? You can even go right down the rabbit hole and put Faraday cages around your infrastructure to make sure that it can't be compromised. But that's a little bit too tinfoil hat for me, nevertheless. Okay? I've really gone down the rabbit hole, I'm sorry. At the end of the day, the skills that you have, if you use those in a manner online, or if you present those in a manner online that looks less than professional, it can cost you a job. So make sure you present them properly. Any questions on that? One of the yeah, that was it. Yes, one of the bigger problems that we've seen with information security jobs, North America wide, basically, has been that they want certification. Are you certified? Are you certified? Well, then no, I can't hire you. And it's not because you need to be certified, it's because people who do the process of hiring don't actually understand what we do when it comes to information security. They can't come up with a list of skills that they're looking for because they have no freaking idea what they're looking for. They just know they need information security people. It's hilarious. So we've got this brutal catch-22 where you have to have security certification before you can get a security job. And the better security certifications require that you have on-job experiences in information security before you qualify for the security certification. Welcome to IT, ladies and gentlemen. There are some companies out there that do offer some certification. If you are interested in this, try and do it alongside of another career. I don't want any, and this has happened a couple of times to me. It's incredible to me. I always tell my students I don't want you to graduate and become information security professionals, and I know of at least 2 of my students who have graduated and become information security professionals, which is awesome for them. I freaking love it. But nevertheless, for me, the ideal information security professional is somebody who already has a few years of experience understanding business, understanding the infrastructure, and then bringing that skills into information security. One of the ways you can augment that is with certification. There are a number of institutions. The EC Council, they have 4 levels. SANS has some good stuff. We'll talk about these again in a little while, but I just want you to think about these. There's a number of different organizations that will give you certification. When we talk about malware in the future, we'll revisit this conversation. So, how do you hack a system? There is no single set of skills. When we take a look at Hack This Site later on this week, I will show you 6 steps that I use for hacking a website. But again, they're just general steps. At the end of the day, there is no single process for hacking a system. And if there is, hackers will look at that process and then find workarounds for it. So you can't ever assume that there's a single perfect way of hacking a website. Often what people do, though, is initially ahead of time is they'll search for vulnerable systems or components. And that includes people, by the way. They'll track security bulletins. They'll do intel gathering, what they call what the hell is it called now? I'm drawing a blank on it. Open source intel gathering on people, which is social media. Basically, they'll comb social media sites, and they're actually tools. I don't look at them in this class, but you know what? Maybe I should. There are some tools that you have on the toolkit that we use in this class. The toolkit is Kali Linux, and there are some open source intelligence gathering tool sets that you can use for trying to find information about people online. And it's always a really good habit for you to go through and research yourself. All right. Once you gain those vulnerabilities, you try and execute code, and once you have that data, you try and decrypt that data or see if you can use that data for something else. The systems that we have in place now have such good technical mitigations that often you need to augment those behaviors with social engineering. Back in the day, we didn't understand the threat that hacking led to or could lead to in our systems, so we didn't focus quite so much on the technical mitigations. And all you have to do is take a look at copies of Windows from before Vista, from Windows XP and earlier, and then look at Windows after Vista, or Vista and later, to see when Microsoft said, hey, you know what, maybe we should do some security on these products we sell for a lot of money. Most software developers and most companies have gotten very good at putting mitigations in place. So because of that, most attacks will involve some aspect of social engineering to help gain access to the system. Some of the steps to stop hackers, these are just some of the things I want you to think of, because I want you to always be thinking when you're looking at systems of potential vulnerabilities. You can use double encryption, making it that much harder to try and crack a password. For example, if somebody's using MD5 as a password encryption hash maker, you can double encrypt it. Okay? Can anybody tell me what's wrong with using MD5? It has been broken. Asterisks again. But yes, that's correct. Jared, you were going to say something. Okay, very good. Both of you are correct. The algorithm is considered compromised and easy to crack. However, please keep in mind that what they're talking about is something called, we'll talk about this in another class. I really don't need to go down the rabbit hole again. They're talking about is hash collisions. And the frequency of hash collisions is enough to make using MD5 worrisome, but it's not as bad as people think. Yeah, it's compromised, and yeah, you should do better, but MD5 is still not horrible. The issue with MD5 is that the algorithm is so lightweight that modern computing systems can actually put a fair amount of resources to it and figure out compromises. But you rarely brute force systems anymore like that. You use other systems as well, and we'll talk about that later on when we look at passwords and password cracking. Back in the day, and I'm guilty of this second bullet as much as anybody else, it was really tricky to get our server applications up and running. And even in the early days of information technology deployments, you were always running around putting out fires. So when someone told you to set up this kind of a server, you would do whatever you had to get it up and running, and that sometimes meant setting up server processes as root. We will see when we're hacking systems this semester that can lead to other types of vulnerabilities. So try and prevent root access at every opportunity. And we see again, most systems block remote root access. Surprisingly, Windows doesn't. You can remote in as an administrator using RDP, and I truly struggle with that. I think that's problematic. As I said before, if you don't want anything compromised, don't put it on the internet. If you're capturing sensitive information, try and push the details of that sensitive information to a different infrastructure that isn't connected to the web. Obviously, it's not air-gapped. If you have a communication path from your web application to this database that's offline, then it's not completely air-gapped. But by pushing that information to that database and creating privileges in that table, in that schema that says, this account has write access to that table, but this account does not have read access to that table, then they can never retrieve that data back from that site. Okay, so for example, credit card information. If you want to do credit card transactions, push the full credit card to a database that doesn't have read access, and then store the last 4 digits so the user can select that credit card again. That's the quintessential example of that. Keep systems up to date with respect to security bulletins. Once you start getting involved in projects and you start using things like Postgres or Apache or whatever, you should subscribe to their mailing lists and make sure that you're aware of any vulnerabilities. I subscribe to the Debian mailing list and I get notifications, and Joomla, because I support a website for my phishing club that uses Joomla, so I get notifications when there are problems with those two packages. And one of the most boring and difficult things you can do in your career is just constantly review access and error logs. It is a mind-numbing process, and I'm going to show you some tools to automate that so that you don't have to go blind staring at truly, truly boring information. Any questions on that? Finally, a quote often attributed to Sun Tzu, to stop a thief, you must think like a thief. The actual quote from Sun Tzu, and we'll see this in a future lecture as well, is that basically you must know yourself and you must know your enemy if you hope to succeed in every battle. But we'll talk about Sun Tzu in a different class. Are there any questions? Very good. There's a couple of things I want you to do in preparation for our next class. I would like you to, if you take a look at week 1 activities, install VirtualBox Client. It doesn't have to be the latest, okay? If you've got a version of VirtualBox that you're happy with, by all means continue to use that. If you haven't used VirtualBox since semester 1 and you're not even sure it's still installed, go download and install the most recent version of the VirtualBox Client, please. If you want to use VMware, you can use VMware. I will not support you when you're having problems with your host-only network. I say that, but I always help students with their host-only networks. But, you're on your own. Just, if you're very, very, very good with VMware and you know how to set up non-standard, non-NAT-based networks, but host-only or local networks where you can allow machine-to-machine communications, continue to use VMware Workstation, I don't care. My classes and all my support material are based on VirtualBox. I'm also asking you to set up Debian. Okay? Grab the latest Debian and set that up. And I need you, if you haven't already done so, I need you to create a LinkedIn account, and please tie that LinkedIn account to first of all, create a LinkedIn account, please. And then what I want you to do is I want you to take the business ethics class that I have here. This is actually a competency. When you take a look at the grade book in this class, you will see that I have a couple of assignments, but the focus really is on competencies in this class. The first one is the ethics competency, and to that end, what I want you to do is I want you to, if you haven't already done so, create a LinkedIn account. I'm pretty sure your PD classes require that you create a LinkedIn account already. There is a link in Hub to LinkedIn Learning, and at that place you can tie your academic email account to your LinkedIn Learning, or to your LinkedIn account, so that you can enroll in some LinkedIn Learning. Once you have a LinkedIn account, and once you've tied your academic email to that LinkedIn account, please enroll in the Business Ethics 2009 course. There are 4 chapters, I think. 3 of the chapters have quizzes associated with them. Each of those quizzes has 4 questions. I expect you to go through all that content, take all of those quizzes, and because you've logged in, you can actually show me at a later date. You can log in again and show me that you've answered all the questions correctly for those 3 quizzes in that learning module. Okay, and there's actually a competency assigned to that, so please make sure that you download and get that in place. Okay, any questions on any of that? Finally, I want you to create an account on hackthisite.org. There should be more instructions on this. Yeah, here we go. I actually have a link to the Hack This site, and I have very detailed instructions on how I want you to create that. When you create an account, please use an email that clearly identifies you. The perfect email would be the college email. I'm not going to force you to use your college email, but I've never gotten any spam from this website. Okay? It is a hacking website. All right? Understand that it is a hacking website, but nevertheless, I've never actually gotten any spam from it. We're going to, I want you to create an account so that you can log in. And once you've got that account created, I'm suggesting that you store the password that you use in the password manager of your browser, whatever you're using. I really encourage you to use Firefox. Again, all of the lectures that I have in this class are based on using the Firefox browser, and you may be saying, well, who cares? When we actually get into manipulating the DOM, and more specifically when we're looking at manipulating session information and cookie information, I'm going to use the DOM manipulation tools that are available to us in Firefox. You can replicate these things in Chrome, there's no question, and if you want to use Chrome, by all means, you should be able to figure it out. If you want to use Internet Explorer or the Edge, you might as well, unenroll from this course at this point, because I will have no respect for you. Just kidding. If you want to use Edge, I don't think they have any of these tools for this kind of data manipulation. I know you can get add-ons for Chrome that might give you some of this functionality. There used to be this really good add-on for Firefox. It was called Tamper Data, and it was brilliant. It was perfect. But all of the features that we had in Tamper Data are now available in the DOM anyway, so it's abandonware at this point. It's too bad because it was great, and I had a lot of lectures based on that as well, but nevertheless. I encourage you to use Firefox in this class. I know it's more memory demanding and can be a little laggy on more basic systems. All of my lectures are based on that. You might as well have it. A, and B, when we get into using Kali, the browser that is installed on Kali is Firefox. It used to be Iceweasel, which is just a port of Firefox, but they stopped with the whole Iceweasel versus Firefox thing. They're just calling it Firefox now in the Linux community. So it's the tool we will be using in Kali anyway. You might as well use it on your desktop as well for this class. So in our next class together, we're actually going to go hacking a website. So please ensure that you have Firefox installed, and please ensure that you've got an account set up on Hack This Site, and then you can log in again. There are 10 activities we're going to look at, and there is a competency based on this as well. So there's actually a couple of competencies from this first week that really get us going and focused on this class. Okay, so that's what I would like you to focus on. There's some week 1 activities. Go through and make sure you do these week 1 activities in preparation for our next class together. I'm going to give you the next hour to work on that. And most importantly, for our next class, ensure that you have Firefox, please, but definitely have an account for Hack This Site in place so that we can actually start hacking this site in our next class together. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to stop recording this now.